So the first question is taking you back to your childhood and asking the first time you remember using your imagination to create something.
That's a very good question. Uh, it's funny because I consider myself of like more of a realist, like a factual person,
Okay.
and I definitely lack an imagination.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, but let me see. Let me think about this. I guess it would be playing for sure. I didn't have a lot of money, or my family was kind of poor growing up. So I didn't have the name brand toys that kids around my age had. So I had to make do with like bootleg Barbies and
Mm,
DIY clothes for them. I think
mm,
that's one thing that I can think of. I played with dolls a lot,
mhm,
but I didn't have the nice fancy dolls.
mm,
I had like made in China, 2 for $1
mhm,
dolls. So it was part of my imagination to make them seem like, maybe the real thing, to pretend like they were like
mm,
the other kids had, and try to make outfits for them because, those are very expensive too.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
figuring out how to use napkins to make them like dresses, or
Yeah. Yeah.
paper mache.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would paper mache clothes for my Barbies and my dolls.
Mm.
Yeah.
Where did you find, where did you even come up with the idea that, oh, I can use a napkin or I can use paper mache? Like, was that around you? Did you see it used in other contexts? Like, where did that idea to apply that to your doll collection?
I must have seen it in school. When I talk about paper mache, I'm talking about like toilet paper with water, and I would
Mm,
just like layer it on.
mm.
It was something that I could get myself. I must have seen it in school.
In school, was there any experience with, did you have art classes? Did you have any sort of like strictly creative space that the teachers provided you that wasn't just like thinking or memorizing?
Not at all.
Okay.
I in school, well, I did half of my school in Mexico. Public school in Mexico is very different from public school in the US.
Okay.
There's no music and there's no art classes. They're very objective and they're strictly for learning. It's a privilege to even believe that you might have an artistic inclination, because if you're going to
Mm,
public school, there's no time for that. Don't
mm,
need to worry about your like psyche or your artistic endeavors. You gotta concentrate on having good grades so you can get out of poverty.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are those subjects that are the most important in the schools that you grew up? Like, what were those subjects that they determined were like the keys to moving on to something bigger or better?
There's like a ton of aptitude tests before you go into it, and there's so many different tiers. So I don't know. I think it works like this in other countries, but you were basically put into a path very early on. So there's testing to know your capabilities, but there's also technical testing to see if you're like science inclined. You can start
Mm,
going on to that route. If you are more, for example, if you're like artistically inclined, what they put those kids in is drafting. So it's like, oh, you like to draw? Well, like, how about we teach you how to make these plans? So you may consider a career in architecture or city planning very, 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 very early on. I'm thinking about middle school for sure,
mhm,
elementary school. Like I said, there's so many tiers. Just so you get an idea of Mexican public school, there's into first grade, there's testing. So there's different grades. There's A, B, C, D, E, F, G of levels that you can be. Of course, A is like you're like the smarter kids,
mm,
G, not so much.
mm,
Sometimes those are separated from like AM studies and PM studies. I don't know if this has changed, but when I was growing up, the half of the letters would get PM classes.
mm.
That was assuming that, you weren't so smart, but you still needed to go to school, but you couldn't do it in the morning because in the morning you would work with your parents or work somehow. and then you had a chance to go to school in the PM. And this is from elementary school. And
Mm,
the same system goes into middle school and then high school. But there's all these tiers, depending on where you test is where you're going to be.
mhm,
So, I mean, of course, there's always testing for the next year. If somebody shows promise, they'll always move like a letter up. But if the family demands more of you outside of school, then you're kind of doomed.
mm,
You're end up at the bottom with no opportunities.
mm. It's such an early age to understand that there's a divide, such a harsh divide between those who are seen as potentially able to succeed and those who kind of have to accept a status quo or just whatever is available to them.
Basically.
At that age, what is that experience like of knowing that, well, I guess the better question is, did you have a preference of which side to be on? Was it important to think about working in a family business, or was it like, no, I want to be in these advanced?
Uh, it's interesting. And I think that's where the privilege of my family experience comes from. Even though we were poor, my mom's priority was for us to get our education. So even if at some point she would have needed help from us to get ahead, it was more important for her that we went to school.
Mhm.
So that was always a priority. School came first, and we didn't have to worry about anything else. As long as we were going to school.
Where in Mexico is home? Where was home?
Guadalajara. That's
Okay,
where I'm right now.
that's Jalisco. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What was your experience with what the city of Guadalajara or like Jalisco as a state or maybe Mexico as a country, what opportunities were there that were rare that if you thought, "Ooh, if I can advance, I might get to participate in this that seems important in my
Mm.
society, in my culture, in my country." Was there anything that was like kind of on the horizon as like, "Oh, if I can get into ABC level, then maybe I could get there."
I think it would go back to education. That's really the only thing that I knew when I was growing up here. If you do well enough in your studies, there's a chance that you can go to university for free. You don't have to pay for it. If your grades are good enough, you get into a system where it's like donation, like a donation depending on your income. So that
Mm,
was the goal. If I wanted to pursue higher education growing up. If you want to, you have to have the grades, so you can test out at a certain level, so you can get your education for practically free.
mhm,
If you're just like an average student, there's always, just like in the US, you can pay for it. Private schools are obviously very expensive.
mhm,
Nothing that a low income person in Mexico could attain to.
mm,
That was that.
yeah. So school was a very much a road to opportunity, whether or not it was specific at the end of that road. It's just like, well, that's going to be a path.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of my family members ended up going into medicine, and there's a part of me that thought that that was probably expected of me at some point,
Mm,
because that was the thing that you did. You study not to become like an academic. That's like very rare. That's not what the importance of education in my family was for. Not to be a professor. It was to be like somebody who makes more money. So like lawyer, doctor, accountant.
sounds great. They're working with money, so.
Yeah.
um, as a child, how aware were you of money, of that being something that had importance, that had as a family or as a society like gave you access?
Very. I was very aware because I was lacking it, of course, in my family. Also, I mean, it was I noticed a shift. I had two parents and they got divorced when I was 5 or 6 years old. When they were together, we were doing very well. I was going to private kindergarten, like
Mm,
it was this very fancy school, pre-K. My brothers were going to private school, and there was like the two cars and the nice house and everything was fine. And shortly after the divorce, it was very difficult. I never saw my father again, in fact. My mom was left with almost nothing. So almost lost the house. no cars, and had to access, the public
Mhm,
system.
mhm,
And it was shocking because I was used to something different. So, like, per se, one Christmas I was getting like the brand name Barbie, and the next one
mhm,
I had socks. So it was very shocking. I noticed the shift very early on.
mhm.
I realized that I used to have money, that my family used to have money and now didn't.
Yeah, it's gonna be so stunning as a child. There would be a year or a day in which before you had it and then you don't.
It was shocking. I I don't know. One thing that stays with me of the money thing, when I was little, I was I'm like a girly, very feminine girl. And I play with dolls and I like dresses and all these like frilly things.
Mhm,
After my parents' divorce, my mom could no longer afford new clothes. And when I started growing, I couldn't wear my like frilly things anymore.
mm,
And I had to take down hand-me-downs from my cousin who was a year older than me. But she was a tomboy. She
mm,
was very boyish. And that was awful for me, just like not being able to be like cute, like I had
mm,
never wore a pair of pants until my parents' divorce. And it's funny, I always had like skirts and dresses.
mm,
And it's funny how something so simple, but I just felt like I looked like a boy. It wasn't even because they were used clothes. It was just because like I was girly, and now I had to wear these like black sneakers
mhm.
from like having shiny like little shoes. It
Yeah,
was really upsetting.
I mean, that's such a I mean, it is at any age, but absolutely as a young person, like, that's kind of how you express your personality, or that's how I did, and that ability to wear something that reflects accurately the things that you like or the things that you're drawn to is really important. So
Mhm.
I can't even imagine that shift to just be like, oh, I got to shift into a different gear here. Like to wear sneakers if you don't feel like wearing sneakers, like that's a strong
Mhm.
message as a child that like, yeah,
Yeah,
like things aren't always permanent.
right. I eventually learned to deal with it, I think maybe that resourcefulness started to come along where if I wasn't gonna have, the frilly, girly things that I wanted to, then there was like, maybe a way that I could change the clothes, or maybe that's why I started making clothes for my Barbies, because that's
Mm,
one thing that I could make myself that didn't cost money.
mm,
I don't know how long it took, but it was a while before I had new clothes. There was
mhm,
for a while, and there's no like secondhand stores here in Mexico, no thrift stores the way that they're in the US. If you want to get used clothes at a lower price, there's these open markets, but they're very chaotic. They're like not shifted at all, or sorry,
mm,
not sifted through at all. So it's not impossible, but it's a little bit more difficult.
yeah. What were things that so if you couldn't have like a full-on dress, what things were became feminine enough to include if you're modifying your own clothes or like little pieces here and there that felt feminine, like, well, at least in this corner, I'm going to have this thing that feels expressive.
Mm, I guess I always had my hair.
Hmm.
I had, yeah, that was the only thing that I could do to feel girly, do my hair in like pigtails or, have something cute. That's really all I can think of for a while. And I don't know, when you're a child, time passes very differently. This phase might have lasted, maybe like 6 months, and I'm like, it was so traumatic. I never had clothes.
Mhm.
Or it might have lasted for 5 years. I have no idea,
Mhm.
really. It's but the way that I remember, it was
Mhm.
this like shift,
Mhm.
and then I had to change, but I never, or I guess I remember not to become the clothes that I was given, try to
Mm.
preserve my like girly, frilly personality as much as possible with that.
Mm. Yeah, bring it all the way back to like something as it's on your body, your hair. It's like, well, this
Mhm.
can't be changed. This is mine. Totally.
Yeah.
Mm. So you said you have some brothers.
I
Where have
have
you
2 older brothers.
2 older brothers. Okay, so you're the youngest then of
Yes.
the children that are in the house. What was your experience of seeing what was offered to your brothers wherever you grew up and what was offered to you?
Pretty typical. So it's a little conflicting too, because I think there's a patriarchal setting here in Mexico, just like anywhere else. The difference was that my family's matriarch was the final word, my grandmother.
Mm,
And she herself, from being we're talking about when she was a teenager, what was it, the 40s in Mexico? She grew up in a very small town, but she herself went to university.
mm,
She was a journalist,
mhm,
not the first of her family, but she, as a woman, was given this opportunity to get higher education, and she was the one who decided. So there's the side of like, yeah, men are superior and they're gonna make the most money, but there's also the voice of my grandmother saying everybody should get an education, including my granddaughters.
mm,
So it was very conflicting. I knew one thing that was more obvious is that my brothers always seemed to have more freedom, where I had to be watched over. My brothers could come and go, and it's like they didn't need to ask for permission, and I had to ask if I could go to the store, or can I do this? Can I do that? I had to ask for permission for everything.
mhm,
And that lasted for a long time. Their curfews was much later. Maybe I couldn't even be out by myself after sundown, or I couldn't go out on the weekends. And that's, I don't know, the gender differences from what might have what could happen to me. Women don't have a lot of safety here in Mexico. It's a little bit dangerous to be a woman growing up, and right now there's a lot of violence against women specifically, and girls in Mexico. So I'm sure that had something to do with that.
mhm.
But I don't know. I sort of didn't care. I
Yeah.
was really bad. When I was in middle school, I skipped
You were
school.
really bad.
I was so bad. I was like, rules, forget them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, starting, like, I was a very good student until I started going to middle school, and I rebelled a little bit from rules. I skipped school, and I would take, like, I would walk to school, get up early, walk to school, and just like take a bus, go downtown, and like just experience the city, all day. There's a few times where I snuck out of my house at midnight, and at 14 years old, I was going to like some random goth bar
Mm,
downtown too. I was really bad. But I think I also didn't understand the danger that was out there.
mhm,
There's a few instances. It's not like my whole time growing up in Mexico was dangerous, but there was a few times where like I could really feel it, or that I was
mm,
reminded that I was not safe. Like when I was very young, when I was little, elementary school age, my hair was pretty short, or like it was never longer than like shoulder length. And that was something that my mother, she made a point of it. I couldn't wear two braids because I have some like semi-indigenous features. I'm like ethnically ambiguous, but growing up in Mexico, my skin was a little bit darker, and I was not allowed to wear two braids because that would make me resemble more of an indigenous girl, a girl that would not be missed if she was lost.
wow.
So she made me cut my hair so I wouldn't be a target, because I walked to school every day, and having something like a little girl walking along with long hair and two braids made you a target. And that's something that I didn't like really get, but I got.
Mm,
It's a weird thing to experience, like, oh no, you're not allowed to have long hair. And I don't know if it was my mom's preconceptions of like what the world was like. I don't
mm,
know if that was a real danger,
Mm.
But it was a real danger to her.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot to carry, even if it's not explicit, you know,
Mhm,
if it's not told like this is the reason why you're not able to go out. It's like
mhm,
that's baked into so many quite possibly very legitimate experience of the danger, but then
mhm,
how as a parent do you not try and prevent that from
mhm,
in your children? But that preventing so often
mhm,
has an effect because your world when you're so young is kind of a
mhm,
clean slate. And
mhm.
so, yeah, that's wild.
The
Um,
language that it was used to describe also, I think I still remember it because you as a girl or as a woman, you were in danger of being stolen. Not taken, not like raped, not kidnapped, stolen. That was the word that was used.
mm,
Like somebody could just take you, but it was it was like that was fine because you were there, you know? And it's part of the victim blaming, you know, it's like or you would hear in conversations like, "Oh, what happened to so and so? Oh, well, she was stolen."
wow.
And that was fine, you know? It was often by somebody who maybe like a boyfriend or like a family member, you would just get stolen, and that was the end of it.
So that word obviously is seems very specific or is
Mhm.
specifically important to you. Are you saying that like something stolen is like it was just there for the taking, this person happened to take it? Whereas like if you're taken, that's thinking of maybe the person that's doing it, but that
Yeah.
person is exempt because this this thing and it's an awful thing to say. This thing was stolen.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that was always shocking to me. I was like an object? You're just stolen like a thing? And I'll never forget it.
Mm.
I can't remember the first time that I heard it, but I never forgot that term. I was like, "I not me. I will
Yeah,
not
right.
be stolen."
Yeah, yeah. What was your experience of, you said I was a bad kid or I snuck out of the house. There's a difference between like ascribing to norms in society and saying like, well, I'll just never try. But then once you experience it for yourself, thinking like, oh, was that so bad? Like that freedom, I know growing up as a man, as a white man, that like I kind of got to feel that like, oh, what's dangerous, what's not by testing, not
Mhm,
by like just saying this is dangerous, this is not, so you don't get to. I got to experience what felt dangerous to me and what felt fine to me, much more than my sisters did. Um,
mhm.
Taking those risks of going out on your own to a goth bar at 14 years old, like was it empowering to learn about what felt good and what didn't feel good as far as risks just by yourself? Was that empowering to you as an individual?
Absolutely. As someone who is constantly being told what to do and what not to do, it was very liberating to just do whatever I wanted to do. I mean, looking back on it, it was very dangerous. Nobody knew where I was. I didn't tell anybody, and I was just in random places by myself or like with an older friend. But it was good. It's like once I once I did it the first time, I just couldn't get enough. I
Mm.
just like I knew that I was always gonna do whatever I wanted.
Okay. I mean, I think that's I mean, you obviously you went on a journey after high school. So, talk about towards the end of high school, what started to crystallize as like, "This is what I want, and I'm gonna try and make some moves," or were there things that came into the picture that prevented, from going in that direction? Like, just post high school into, like, collegiate years?
There were. I mean, the move from Mexico to the US was that big hump. At some point, I used to did see it as an opportunity to reinvent myself, and maybe I didn't have to be so bad, you know, because I was like already like an alternative, like bad kid when I was in Mexico, you know, where I wanted to like stand out and be the odd one out. When I moved to the US, I had all these preconceptions about what high school was going to be like, and I kind of just wanted to be part of it and not stand out.
Mm.
But that sentiment was very short lived maybe within 6 months, I was like, actually, no, never mind. I fucking hate everything again. And
Like
just
it's a
like,
part of you. It's not just like because you're in Mexico. It's
it
like,
was
oh,
not a
it's
face,
my
okay?
personality. What's that?
It was not a face.
No, it's you. Which is a really beautiful thing. So what brought you to the States? What were the circumstances that made that move a reality?
My mom had an American boyfriend. They dated for 5 years. And yeah, after 5 years, they decided that it would be better for us to move to the US. At some point, there was talks about him moving to Mexico, but I guess he just didn't want to learn Spanish. So he figured it would be easier for us to move to the US
And I'll learn English.
and all of us learn
More
English. Yeah.
people learn English.
I don't know how long the plan was in place, but for me, it happened very quickly. I feel like within, it's like one day I was in Mexico and the next day I was in the US. Actually, today, February 5th, 2004 is when I immigrated to the US.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah. Woo. Yeah. It's a day to remember. It was really, it feels like such a long time ago. I was 15 or 16 years old. I was actually not allowed to leave the country because my parents, when they divorced, they split custody. So, and because I was still underage, I needed my father's permission to leave the country. And I didn't have that. I hadn't seen him in years. So we had to lie. My grandmother had just passed away a few months before. So in order to get out of the country, we had to come up with a story that my grandmother's dying wish was for us to go to Disney World. And I had to say that in order to get out. Otherwise, I wouldn't be allowed. And we were hoping that it would happen. Of course, there was a chance that they would say like, no, not good enough. You need this like person's signature. And yeah, we had to lie, and I was only supposed to be in the US. I had a return ticket like a week later, and we just stayed.
Wow. Was that a time of thrill or of just like terror or everything?
It was awful. It wasn't easy, I was underage, and so was my other brother, but one of my brothers was already 18. So even though we had everything that we thought we needed to have and the perfect excuse, the perfect plan, we were still detained at the border. And that day we were questioned for a few hours. Me, not so much, but my brothers did because they're males, and this is also like shortly after 9/11. So security was extra tight back then. And yeah, saying that my grandmother had a dying wish of us going to Disneyland was suspicious for my two male brothers who were 17 and 18. Border Patrol was like, oh, Disney World? Really? Or do you mean terrorism? So it was a little bit nerve-wracking, but we made it through.
You made it through. So coming to a totally different country where at least the main language is different from your native language, under circumstances where you had to stick to a story, an agreed upon story, you said it took a little while to feel that same like confidence of just like, fuck the system. This is me. I'm gonna explore and do what I want. What happened in those 6 months, those first 6 months, or that first time until you got back in contact with that energy that you felt like that wasn't allowing you to tap back into that?
I mean, it was almost everything. Everything that I knew about the US and the US high school system, I learned through movies. The typical, I saw them in Mexico too. She Saw That, 10 Things I Hate About You, all of those movies. I was like, whoa, high school, cool. And I thought that by watching those movies, I was going to understand what it was going to be like to be a high school student in the US. So when none of those expectations were met, I was kind of mad. I was kind of pissed off. And I really thought it was gonna be just so much better here, and it wasn't. It was kind of the same, just on a different package,
Hmm.
and in some ways worse. Like, the food was worse, like, I'm sure
Where did you land? Where was your first home in the States?
Florida. So, I remember, I had, like, a fairly healthy relationship with food, close to the source from visiting my grandmother's small town. I knew how, like, meat was processed. There was many times that there was like a party and they're like, okay, let's go to the farm and pick out, like, I don't know, what do you want? Like a pig or a piglet? Or do you want like a big cow or a small cow? And we're like, oh yeah, that one. Cool. Butchered and served, within 2 days.
Mhm.
I would go to the stable to get fresh milk.
Mm.
I knew how chickens were raised and processed. My great grandmother every Christmas would get a turkey and get it so drunk. She would spend 3 days getting it so drunk until at the end of the day, when she was ready to cook, the turkey would just like lay on a stump, and she was just like, kill it. So I knew where it
Wow.
come from, right?
Yeah.
And there was like farms all around.
Yeah.
And in Florida, I was like, what is this shit? Going to the grocery store, seeing like all of the fruit like perfectly shiny. I was like, this is artificial. Like, give me an open air market.
Mhm.
And seeing all the meat prepackaged, it was so grossed out to me that I like search. I was like, where does this even come from? It doesn't look like what I remember, like the
Mm.
fish and the meat, nothing had the same color.
Mhm.
So that was part of it, the shock. Like, the US was supposed to be so much better, but the food was so much worse.
Mm.
I rebelled. I actually became a vegan because I was so upset, because even dairy was like, I was like, disgusting. This is not real.
Mm.
I became a vegan for like, I don't know, maybe a year. I didn't make it.
Yeah.
Uh, but that was part of the disappointment of the US.
Yeah.
I had been told that it was so much better,
Yeah.
and it wasn't.
Like the sterility, the pristineness, lacking the reality that food has to be grown and can rot. Like, I feel like that's such an American thing to like, well, we want to like block out the first part of the food system and the last part. And we just want to see like, it's almost, yeah, it's just like intentionally blinding yourself to like, oh, something can go bad. And yet like, as it ripens, it gets better and better and better. But we've
Yeah.
like kind of lopped off these sides. And so it's just like, just give me a perfectly yellow pepper, like, and not know that it like grew into its color, or like cheese grows into its ripeness or anything like that.
Yeah, I had no idea that I had accidentally grown up eating a lot of organic food.
Hmm.
Like, there's so many times where I would like bite into an apple and there might be like a little, not maggot, but like a little thing in there, and it was
Worm, yeah.
you just like cut a part of it and you just keep eating the apple.
Yeah.
That's just what happens. There might be some bugsies here or there.
Yeah.
And becoming aware of like industrial farming and the pesticides and all of these things, I was like, what is going on? What is happening?
Mhm.
I didn't have to face it before, or I was in a bubble, in my small bubble in Mexico, being in proximity to a small town with like a family that cared a lot about where food came from.
Mhm.
I never had to experience that. So like, moving to the US, there's these like beautiful shiny apple that you bite into it and has no taste.
Right. It's almost shocking how that could be. You're like, this looks perfect, and it
Yeah.
tastes like nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so interesting. You had an expectation of what America would be like. That expectation just wasn't lived up to, and that helped you get in contact, from what I'm understanding, with the like there was anger because that was supposed to be something and it just wasn't met to something that was like promised or portrayed as an ideal.
Mhm.
I think anger is such an important emotion to feel, because you get in contact with an energy that if you just kind of stay calm all the time, you, again, like a medium tone, it's like, I'm not mad, I'm not happy, I'm just kind of accepting. So like, to be able to get in touch with the intensity of anger helps you break out and like weed through some ridiculousness and get to like what the meat of it is, the core of what you want to go after. What was your experience with that emotion, with anger, growing up? Was that something that was encouraged and understood as like a normal experience for a young person, a young woman, or was there ideas about the appropriateness of that type of feeling?
I don't know if it was appropriate or inappropriate. Generally speaking, my mother criticized me for not being ladylike at the time. And I don't think she understood where the anger was coming from. But yeah, there was a lot of anger and on top of the teenage angst from being taken from the place where I grew up. And I mean, everybody processes their emotions differently. There was many years where I threw that anger inward, towards myself.
Mm.
It's like first outside and rage and loud, angsty teenager, and then just inside. And it took so many years to finally be at peace with it. I don't think that anger, I don't know if it's going to go away, but maybe now is manifesting again as an angst that just keeps me going and keeps me wanting to shake things up,
Mhm.
to not be complacent with the status quo or whatever, to see what else is there, if there's another option, to see another side of things.
Mhm.
So it's coming out again in a more productive way.
Yeah, I think speaking as someone who kind of had to learn to not fear my own anger, just because the structures around me said that being angry was a inherently bad thing, and
Mhm.
not how to understand it, how to see the message that maybe it's trying to convey. So, being in a new country, kind of getting over that initial shock, maybe of what it isn't. Where did you then say like, well, if it's not this, what did you determine to, like, start to go after in this country?
I actually sort of, while my personality took a turn in as like life speaking, I went back to basics. Since I understood that I didn't know anything, then I try to learn as much as possible.
Mm,
So I focus on education, and that's how I eventually found my path. And it was funny to experience it as a teenager because I mean, I still remember feeling like everything, And of course, I had that feeling about the US, like, oh, the US, yeah, I know how it works. Okay. You don't tell me how it works. So being like slapped in the face with, like, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I was like, okay, well, I don't know anything. Like,
mm,
let me learn everything over again. Let me learn all of the words, all of the vocabulary,
mm,
all of the slang, all of the foods, all of the like social settings, all of the social norms. Like, let me just learn. And I focus on learning academically in school and learning about my surroundings.
mhm,
That was just something that I could do. In a way, it was like going back to education. Like, this is my only path to move forward.
mhm.
I just like educate myself or like spend time on my education, then I'll like get somewhere. I didn't know where. There was no goal anymore.
Mhm,
In the when I was in Mexico, it was maybe assumed that I might end up going for like a medical path.
mhm.
But in the US, there were so many more different paths. Like, ugh, I don't know,
Yeah.
but I guess I'll, like, learn as much as I can on the way.
What were those things that you dedicated yourself that gave you the most options? If I learn this, that opens up 3 more doors or keeps those doors open. Like, what are those things that you felt like weren't limiting?
Mm, language, so, like, English. But actually, it reminds me, I took advantage of the privilege to learn creative skills. The shocking part too, going into American high school, is that there was like art classes
Mm,
that were like mandatory, it's part of that curriculum.
Mhm.
The what's it called? Art or music or like sports. I wasn't very sporty, good at art, bad at sports. So I took advantage of that. I allowed myself to have the privilege to be artistic. So it opened a new world for me.
Mhm.
That was never an option. Like you don't do art in school. That's not go to school to like learn about numbers and science. So that was cool. I think I joined the art club.
Mhm. What mediums or what expressions were like particularly fun to you?
I started painting self-portraits, and I took on photography. There was something really cool. There was an old school photo studio in my high school, so black and white, processing the whole thing.
Yeah.
That was the coolest thing about being in American high school,
Mhm.
just being able to do art as a subject.
Totally.
Cool.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Ours was more, I think, practically focused. But something like painting or photography is like for the satisfaction of observing your world, of reflecting whatever you see, of being able to create or capture what is your perspective. Did that cross with food? Did that like ability to express apply to food, to cooking, to baking at that time, or is that something that like over time, or has it ever like intersected with something like that?
Yeah, that's a very good observation. And I think that there's a lot of similarities in between like, visual arts and culinary arts. I didn't find the intersection of it until much later when I moved to Chicago. That's how I found my path. Yeah, being in American high school, taking these art classes made me realize that I was a little bit artistic or artistically inclined.
Mm,
I had never been allowed to do that before, or it was never a priority or somebody that anybody cared about. Maybe I had shown some like artistic potential early on, but grades came first. So I was pushed academically, not creatively. So having that opportunity, it was eye-opening for myself because I didn't know that I could. I didn't know that I was like capable. And it felt really cool. I considered going to art school after high school for a while. That I mean that's university experience was a complete mess. That there was like my parents' expectations of what I should be and then my newfound love of like self-expression that combined with the angst and the anger.
mhm,
That like I said, it was this like conflicting path for a while
mhm,
that I didn't find my place until I was already 21. I had been in and out of different like programs. I went to community college. I took some online classes. I took some more like academic immersive quarters, to get past. But I had this block academically and also the desire to do something else. I was like, well, what if I could be an artist? But yeah, it wasn't until I moved to Chicago that I fell into culinary job, like a very fancy restaurant job, that I realized that there is art in food
mm,
too. And I knew that there were cooks, and as a woman in Mexico, you generally know how to cook,
mhm,
but I never knew of the term chef until I had this restaurant job.
mm,
And that opened a whole world for me. There's this something that I've always been very close to, which is food and taste
mhm.
combined with the visual composition, perform in an artistic way. I
Yeah,
was like, wow, this is it.
yeah, yeah. I feel like you and I could kind of go back and forth of talking about the fine dining scene, like the positives and negatives. So I'd like to stick with like the creative aspect. And to me, what I can legitimately validate is like there's a beauty, there's an artistry there. How that comes about or how that's sustained, there's lots of conversations about whether or not that's even sustainable. But
Yeah.
I'm interested in the word artist and the word chef. Did they feel more akin to each other once you kind of learned of chef? Did it seem like there could be a satisfaction, a meeting of those two things? Well, like you're saying, chef is kind of the orchestrator, like creating vision, having an idea of where it wants to of where they want to go, using materials to express something that's on their mind,
Yeah.
or representing something that they know on a deeper level, but making it their own, which I think is very evident in the stuff that you create. It's like, oh, there's definitely a root, there's a tradition in what I perceive. Uh, is your culture, is what you would find from Mexico, but then like I'm the chef or I'm the artist. I get to like spin. So,
Mhm.
what was your first experience in Chicago seeing something that felt truly representative of knowing the root, knowing where something comes from, but then like taking a really beautiful and almost respectful turn to make it something new that wasn't just exploitative?
Mm, mm, mhm.
If there are none, that's interesting too.
There are. I do have to say that my experience, strictly speaking, is on pastry, and not that it's like it's pretty different from savory cooking. I gotta say, it's a little bit more contrived and a little bit more precise. It's more of a science than just cooking
Mhm.
savory food.
Sure.
In fine dining, one of the first things that I learned about like flavor manipulation and cooking and pastry was, in order to get one flavor across, you need to complement it with other flavors, but
Mm.
also make sure that your main flavor is represented well enough.
Mhm.
And it was like the rule of threes, which you see a lot in pastry. So it was the same flavor three times with three different textures.
Wow.
And this is something particularly from the chef that I first trained under. I really liked this experience. It was something that you can write down, it was very technical. So, for example, there was a strawberry dessert, and it was, this is 2010. There was the strawberry was the main flavor of it, but there's all these complements to it. So I think it was like strawberry parfait. So the strawberry was like a frozen mousse, and then it was freeze-dried strawberries, and there was like a strawberry gel in it too, complemented with these other things. But it was like, oh no, it's not just like the fruit dessert. This is a strawberry dessert.
Mhm.
So, and there was these like candied balsamic, like little pearls that they call caviar. That was so much fun to make, just like with the
Mhm.
droplets.
Mhm.
But there's all these components to this dessert, but it was strawberry, and
Mhm.
it was done three ways, three different textures, and
Mm.
you had your high and your lows, your sweet, your savory, your acidic, your fatty. It was all of these components coming together to make this delicious thing,
Mhm.
and that blew my mind.
Mm.
And this is like, I was so lucky to experience it because this is in like my first month ever cooking,
Mm.
and like putting all these like things together, and like then it's not only like making the ingredients or the mise en place, but seeing them plated too. That was like the final thing, like you make every single thing, you taste every single thing tastes good on its own. And then you put it together in this beautiful way that is showing off your ingredients, the techniques that you use, and also all together as in a sculpture. And then I also remember very clearly his like method of plating was like, no matter where you put your spoon, because you're not going to be there to tell the guest how they're going to eat it. You have to intuitively plate it, so wherever they put their spoon, you taste, if not all of it, all of the ingredients, all of the elements, most of them.
Mhm.
And I was just like, oh my god, brilliant. you know so this is like my first month of like being in the kitchen, and it
Yeah.
blew my mind. And I was like, I want to learn how to do that. Because
Yeah.
he also seemed to just like pull it out of his ass, and it's like, and dessert. And I was like, what? What do you mean? How do you
Yeah.
even put in like balsamic caviar into this strawberry dessert? Who even thinks of that?
Yeah.
It was amazing. It's
Yeah.
pretty.
Sounds pretty
He
memorable.
later on went to be the pastry chef of the French Laundry.
So sounds like
So
you saw some early examples of great potential.
it was pretty cool, I gotta
That's
say.
really beautiful. As a cook, as a young cook, experiencing those things, like what did you feel like you saw as like an important thing to foster and environmentally as a whole kitchen, as a whole restaurant?
There's many instances where I worked in a kitchen and I never saw the finished product.
Yeah.
And yeah, there was many times where I was in a kitchen where the dynamic was completely different, that it didn't feel like a collaborative effort. It felt like you are beneath me
Mm,
and you don't deserve me directly talking to you,
yeah.
or you are not like me, so you only do as people tell you and do not try to participate on anything else.
As a future, I mean, you are now a business owner, you do have employees, like, what did you learn in those early days of, like, being on the receiving end? Like, "Oh, this helps me as a cook feel like I am involved in this three-dimensional experience of what it means to be a restaurant worker, what it means to be a chef," like, that you were then mindful of as you created your own place.
Wanted to be mindful of not making anybody who was participating in a food establishment feel like they were beneath somebody else. I I guess I could see how rankings can be important, but for the kind of business that I eventually started to run, they were unnecessary. And it's the same with hierarchies. I think generally those are self-serving and they don't serve the restaurant or the food place as a whole, you know? Sure, like somebody has to be in charge, but it doesn't mean that, the manager has all the power. So, yeah, division of power. If like if a fine dining kitchen is an authoritarian regime, I run more like a socialist kitchen for sure. I mean, as best as I can too. It's really hard to have a business because there's this goal, you're supposed to make money, but it's hard to run a business without money being the main priority. So it's interesting. I mean, I'm learning as I go. I saw, in my opinion, many mistakes being made in the kitchen when it came to pay and respect to employees. And I mean, they're still fresh. I haven't forgotten it. So I try not to make those mistakes. I'm not free from fault. There's like having a tough economic situation is difficult, but I try to be as transparent as possible, and if it's not going well, then it's not going well, and the employees know it, but they also know that it's my responsibility. It's not their fault that it's not going well,
Mm,
because at the end of the day, it's my business.
mm,
So it like kind of falls on me, but it kind of falls on everyone naturally too.
mhm. Yeah, to take that on is to say, like, yeah, it is my business, like, that is I started it. I was the first one in here, and I'll be the last one to go,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think is those bookends are there, and then everything in between is kind of an exploration of, like, what it does mean to share power, what it does mean to be equitable when you're financially stressed, when, like, the economy shuts down, like, you're a different person when the
Mhm,
finances are tight. Not necessarily a totally different person, but, like, different emotions come up when you're pushed like that to
mhm,
say, like, "Oh, wow, like, do I believe it's important to be equitable even when I'm very uncertain about the future because like it's so tempting to like
Mhm.
take the reins and really be strong. So I think it's important, and I imagine to build infrastructure early that like keeps that net. There's more people like holding that net.
I also think it's an unfair expectation to well, it's unfair to expect every employee to be as invested emotionally and physically as you are as a business owner. And I see a lot of people have that expectation, but that's hard, you know, it's just a job for a lot of people. So I can't force anybody to care as much as I do because I don't think anybody's going to care as much as I do. But one thing that I can do is make them understand that I care about them just as much as I care about the business.
Mhm,
And yeah, it's the only thing that you can do.
mhm.
But that's just me.
That's just you. That's all you can answer for. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Happy to meet you.
Thank you, Jeff. Nice to meet you too.
Enjoy your time in Mexico, and maybe I'll see you in Chicago when you're back.
Hopefully.
All right.
Bye.